So in June of this year, something amazing happened. The millennial generation, otherwise known as those born 1980 to 1995, became a majority of the global workforce. And today we're going to be talking a lot about engagement strategies. But over the last several years, I have had the experience through my research, through my writing, through my consulting to interact with about 20,000 of these young professionals. I've heard every buzzword about them, every good stereotype, every bad stereotype. But one thing has become clear to me, and that's that it's not just about the millennials anymore. Due to their sheer size, the business transformations they have driven have become critical for all people in our workforces, not just the millennials. So think about that as we're talking about some of these engagement strategies today. So we're going to do two kinds of polls, the low-tech and the high-tech, for all of our generations represented in the room. So first of all, the low-tech. I would love for you all to raise your hands if you feel more kindly toward your millennial relatives, let's say sisters, brothers, kids, than you do toward the similarly aged people who work in your office. Raise your hand if that's the case. Okay, see some people? Some people raising their hands. Other people think they're kind of equal. I might take some of you to task about that. How many of you in the audience are millennials? 1980 to 1995. Okay, I see probably about a quarter. So I rely on you all to keep me honest, right? Now we're going to try to use the high-tech version. Do you feel millennials are different from previous generations at the same age? Here we have a picture of Woodstock. Baby boomers were a little bit crazy when they were in their 20s, early 30s. So I think the poll is going to come up here. So if you believe they are different, choose A. If you believe they're not different, choose B. You're welcome to try and text, I say try, to 22333, HCI webcast with an S, to join, and then choose A or B. We'll do our best. Okay. Some people choosing A now. Very interesting. Oh, A has pulled ahead. It's kind of a complex question, right? There are similarities and there are differences. Okay, so the people who answered early were into B, and we have moved forward to A. Very interesting. Okay. Okay. Next one, we'll try the high-tech method again. Based on what you've heard about millennials to this point, are you concerned about having to overhaul your entire organization for them? So choose yes, that's letter A, and no is B. 22333 HCI webcasts. Okay, lots of people not concerned. That makes me happy. We'll give it a minute. Okay. So the majority of you are not concerned, which I think is good, because I'm not concerned about you having to do this either. My goal over the next 25 minutes or so is to give you all a couple of practical things you can bring back to your organization tomorrow in order to engage your millennials, and as we're going to talk about, your Gen Zers to come. The goal is short, sweet, and something that can be implemented relatively easily. Today we are telling a story. It is the tale of three cohorts. I wonder how many of you knew that there are actually two groups of millennials. Anybody know that? Raise your hand if you knew that. Okay, a handful of people have spoken up. We have the early millennials and the late millennials. What makes them different? It's primarily based on when they graduated from college. The early millennials graduated prior to the recession that started in 2008. The late millennials graduated during the recession or after the recession. As we're going to see, there are qualitative differences between those two groups. I was just going to talk about the two cohorts of millennials. But as I was preparing for this talk today, I heard from several of you who said, what about the generation after the millennials? And you were right to be concerned about them, because we have Generation Z coming up. And Generation Z, the oldest of these young people, will be graduating college within the next 3 years. They will be your entry-level people in a very short period of time. So we're going to talk about them as well. Before we really get going, I thought it might be a little bit helpful for me to explain how I came to be standing here today. This is a picture of me at 11 months old. Normally, when you see pictures of 1-year-olds, you see them in the high chair having the cake smashed in their face. That wasn't the personality that I had even as a baby. I decided to reach up and grab that cake myself. And I continued much in the same vein for the next 21 years. I graduated early from Northwestern University here in the Chicago area. And I had all A's in 1998, and I thought I was going to go out and be a VP by the age of 30. That's not exactly how it worked out for me. Here you see my first team at a large public relations agency in New York. We are all smiling in this picture, but that's because our boss wasn't there. Folks, this woman could not stand me. I was so afraid of her, I used to hide behind my desk, which was in the hallway, because she wouldn't even give me a cubicle. I thought I had killed a relative. She would call me into her office, and she would ream me out and say things to me like, Alex, I'm sorry to tell you, but nobody here really likes you, or your career is self-destructing. So at 21 years old, I would love to be able to tell you that things turned around once I escaped that situation. Nope. Here I am 3 years later, identical picture. Don't let their smiles fool you. I had another boss. This one was a bit kinder to me, but she still said things to me like, Alex, I'm afraid you're a square peg in a round hole. If you can't assimilate, I might have to let you go. This time I was working for a large Fortune 500 software firm. However, this boss was a bit kinder. She said to me, Alex, I think you have some potential, so I'm sending you to personal development classes. Well, as someone who's 25, that sounds like the kiss of death. You need personal development? What does that mean? But in fact, I took a course called Dale Carnegie, and I learned the importance of diplomacy and making a good first impression, and that was when this light bulb went off. And I was like, wow, someone should really clue in other 20-somethings on what they need to do to be successful in business. And that was when I got the idea for my very first book, which was called They Don't Teach Corporate in College, a 20-somethings Guide to the Business World. And here you see me signing copies in 2004. And I intended the book initially to be a side project, but ironically, I'd finally started getting ahead in corporate America, so there I was to stay. But I started getting asked to do all these opportunities, speak to organizations like you all around the world on workforce issues facing young employees. And in 2008, things had really started to get going. And then, just as I'd had a few years of success talking to my peers, fellow Gen Xers, about climbing the ladder and paying your dues, things Gen Xers get, my messages started falling flat. There was a new crop of 20-somethings in town called the millennials, and they didn't care much for what I had to say. They really didn't like to hear about paying dues. They didn't like to hear about climbing the ladder. They also didn't like my presentations. I went to one company where the millennials who were listening to me got to review the deck ahead of time. They decided to send back my deck with some changes. The thing had so many bells and whistles and crazy spinning features, I almost had a seizure when I was presenting it. And that was one of my first lessons about millennials, which is that you can't give them the content the way you want to. You have to give them options for how they're going to digest content. And sometimes they want a short video, sometimes they want an app, sometimes they want a transcript. And it just depends on the individual. Now, at the same time, I mentioned I was still working in the business world. And I became a boss. And I had this one millennial employee, her name was Lori. She comes into my office and is like, Alex, I'm ready for more strategic responsibilities. And I was like, Lori, you've only been out of college for 2 months, and you've only been working for me for 2 weeks. But fine, okay, here's a project, run with it, I'll see you in a month. This is how Gen X managers like to do things. Well, she's back in my office 5 minutes later saying, Alex, this project is too much responsibility, I need your help. Folks, I had just about had it, because everything was going wrong for me again. But at the same time, I realized that it was my job to figure out what made these young professionals tick, because if I didn't, I was going to have trouble in both areas of my life. And that was how I got into the area of millennial research and started actually doing qualitative and quantitative research, the results of which I'm going to share with you in the next couple minutes related to some concrete tactics that you can take back. So let's start with the early millennials. Born 1980 to 1986. This group was shaped primarily by 3 forces: terrorism, heroism, and technology. They were at a very formative age when 9/11 happened. They watched first responders respond with confidence. Their parents raised them to believe that they were special and they could do anything that they wanted. Well, this caused much agita when they went out into the workforce. In fact, I can tell you honestly, I was gainfully employed from 2005 to 2008 solely by companies calling up and saying, I have these millennials, I don't know what to do with them. The problem now, though, is a little bit different. Many people don't realize that these early millennials are managers already. Some of you are here in this room today. I did a study with Deloitte last year that showed that of all global working millennial professionals, half of them have decision-making authority in an organization and more than 2 direct reports. Bet you didn't know that. Another interesting thing, we think of this cohort as being very overconfident. But when we ask the managers, do you feel ready to be in this position? Do you feel your company has prepared you? Fully 1/3 said no. They don't feel ready. So that's something for us as human capital professionals to think about. Millennials also like to manage a little bit differently. We've seen a lot of news recently about the rise of the holacracy, getting rid of titles and having everyone be equal, because millennials are kind of anti-hierarchy. Well, this was illustrated to me very, very plainly when I was doing some consulting work for a consumer goods company, and a manager asked me to join his meeting. He was a 27-year-old manager. And I was late getting into the building because of security, and so I missed the start of the meeting. I'm sitting there for an hour, and I kid you not, I could not tell who the manager in that room was. And so at the end of the meeting, he comes up to me and introduces himself, and I said, I have to be honest with you. I had no idea who was running that meeting. And he's like, that's the way I like it, because everybody on my team is an equal. That's the way millennials like to manage. It's a very different paradigm. So what do we do for these would-be managers, these young professionals who are coming in and entering leadership positions an average of 10 years earlier than prior generations? A couple of quick things. First of all, experiential learning. We've been talking a lot over the course of the day about blended learning, which is great because this group is not a huge fan of classroom learning in general. They like the apprenticeship model, where they can stand by a senior leader's side during a crisis and see how they behave and match their own behavior to that. They like any situation that is a real-world business case where they can learn on the job and master skills that way. My partner Deloitte is doing a great job with this. They've got a program called Project-Based Leadership, where each up-and-coming supervisor has 5 project teams that are overseeing their development. And there's a senior leader in charge of each. And each one is designated for them to learn a specific managerial skill. This is great for small organizations because you don't have to have a super fancy leadership program. You just go above and beyond to make sure they get the exposure to senior leaders so that they can practice these skills in real time. We've also talked a lot today about transparency and culture. This is critical for these managers. They need you all as human capital professionals to open a channel of communication from the top so that they know the big picture they should be communicating to their direct reports. They are not fond of silos. They want everything to be on the table. And they feel uncomfortable when they don't know what's going on because then they feel like they can't communicate it accurately to their people. A stake in the ground. This cohort's Achilles heel is their fear of failure. Their parents raised them in such a way that they protected them from making mistakes. And now that they're in managerial roles, they're paralyzed. As human capital professionals, it can be your role to let them know it's okay to make a mistake. As long as you take action and you learn from your experience, it's okay. That's what we want to see from you, rather than 100% success 100% of the time. And finally, customized rewards. It sort of goes without saying that this cohort is not just about money. They're not just about climbing the ladder. In fact, many of them don't even want to climb the ladder. So you have to really look at rewards and recognition from an individual standpoint. What matters to that particular leader? What's going to motivate him or her to stick around? It's more work, but it's sort of necessary. I can tell you that in the research that I've done, work-life integration, I prefer that term to balance, is the most important thing for these young managers. They're stuck in the sandwich. They're going to soon have young children to raise. They're going to have elderly grandparents and parents they have to contend with, and very high-maintenance careers, and also they want to have a life, because that's just how they are. So you are in a position to help them manage this, and that in and of itself can be a reward. Moving on to the late millennials. So the late millennials, born roughly after 1997 to 1995, here you see a photograph of a young woman moving back into her parents' house. 60% of this cohort has moved back in with their parents after school due to the recession. Also partly due to the fact that fully 50% of them are underemployed. Technical definition of that, they have had to hold jobs that did not require a college degree in order to make money, get experience, get by. And as a result, this young generation, this young cohort of millennials has become very dependent on their parents. And they've had an extremely delayed maturity. We've heard the term helicopter parenting, where the parents hover and they talk to their parents multiple times a day. This was epitomized for me a few months ago when my friend, who was a VP of HR, called me up and said, Alex, I gotta tell you, I just had to let go a 24-year-old Yale grad with unbelievable references and GPA. I had to let her go from consideration. And I said, well, why would you do that? And she said, because her mom accidentally wrote her own name on the application. You can't make this stuff up. Now, the advantage of this situation is once you unload the parents, this generation is actually this group is more humble. They feel grateful to work in your organizations. They want to learn from you, provided you can offer that sensible authority. Still has to make sense to them, but they are eager to be guided and eager to be shown the way. So these folks, more or less, are your entry-level and junior-level people. So what can you do in order to help them engage and, more importantly, be productive, contributing members of your organization? Number one, Show that you are on top of things. This cohort has shown us they are very, very sensitive to first impressions. And the worst thing you can do is have them show up on their first day, sitting in a cube, looking at the four walls because their boss is on vacation or traveling or no one really knows what's going on. Have a plan for how you can engage them in meaningful work as soon as possible because they won't be very patient in waiting for it. Orientations should be interactive, they should be relatively short, and you should do everything you can to make them feel welcome and make them feel like they were hired for a reason. Expectation boot camp. I hear from leaders all the time, what is wrong with these kids? They don't have any common sense. And, to be fair, some of this is true. The things that we as Xers and Boomers think of as common sense, these young professionals, it doesn't really occur to them. So when in doubt, spell it out. At the beginning of a tenure of a young professional or a group of them, you got to sit down and actually lay out what's the proper way to communicate in this organization, what's the proper way to dress, how do we manage our devices, what are protocols, little individual cultural things you might want to be aware of, like it's not okay for you to go by the CEO's office in the morning and just walk into the office and say hello. I mean, that's something that they would do. It's not necessarily okay to be in a meeting and be on your device the whole time because somebody might think that you're not paying attention. They could be taking notes. I've seen this happen over and over. Helping them make connections. People think that millennials are good at networking. That's kind of a myth. They're good at online networking and they're good at social networking, but they're not good at making in-person relationships. So help them identify star performers within the organization, preferably that are a few years ahead of them on the ladder, that can guide them and get them immersed and assimilated in the organization and getting to know different departments. And finally, microfeedback. This is a group where if left to their own devices, they will be in the offices of their managers every 5 minutes. You don't necessarily want that. But at the same time, you don't have to spend a lot of time drafting up these lengthy documents of feedback or preparing for these long conversations with them. There are apps out there like Slack where you can send one emoticon, a smiley face, to let them know they've done a great job on a presentation. That's all it takes. But for them, remember, no news is bad news. If they don't hear something, they're going to think they're not doing well. So microfeedback, 144 Yammer characters or Twitter characters, an emoticon, something that provides feedback, as we just heard about Adobe doing, in real time. Finally, our final cohort is Generation Z, and we are going to start with a brief video to illustrate some of their characteristics. This is 13-year-old Logan LaPlante. Mitch?
A lot of people think of hackers as geeky computer nerds who live in their parents' basement and spread computer viruses. But I don't see it that way. Hackers are innovators. Hackers are people who challenge and change the systems to make them work differently, to make them work better. It's just how they think. It's a mindset. I'm growing up in a world that needs more people with the hacker mindset. And not just for technology. Everything is up for being hacked, even skiing, even education. So whether it's Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, or Shane McConkey, having the hacker mindset can change the world. Healthy, happy, creativity, and the hacker mindset are all a large part of my education. I call it hack schooling. I don't use any one particular curriculum, and I'm not dedicated to any one particular approach. I hack my education. I take advantage of opportunities in my community and through a network of my friends and family. I take advantage of opportunities to experience what I'm learning, and I'm not afraid to look for shortcuts or hacks to get a better, faster result.
So that's Generation Z, born 1996 to 2012, at least for now. We'll see if those years change over time. Now, Logan is Caucasian, but believe it or not, in this generation, he's in the minority. The most interesting thing I find about Generation Z is their multiple ethnicities. They are the most blended generation in American history. Case in point, my 9-year-old next-door neighbor. His name is Richard. He's a quarter African American, a quarter Taiwanese, a quarter Ashkenazi Jewish, and a quarter Hispanic. If you ask Richard what his race is, he will say, "I have no race." And this has major implications for us, folks, if you think about the way that we are managing diversity and inclusion. Ethnic diversity is meaningless to these guys. It's a given. So is gender diversity. Instead, they think of what is termed cognitive diversity, the ability to bring your genuine self to the workplace. And we're going to have to rethink that as well. The other thing about Generation Z is what Logan talked about, and that's their hacking mentality. Surprisingly, somewhat, this generation is less dependent on their parents because they have technology to rely on. If they have a question, they ask Siri, or they ask Google. My 7-year-old and 4-year-old even do this. They've stopped coming and asking their why questions to me and their dad. Now they just ask Siri and see what she comes up with. This has led them to be very, very independent and to learn a tremendous amount about the world, including its problems, at a young age. The maturity of this generation has been accelerated. If you've talked to them, you'll see that they are actually ready to begin engaging with their future employers at a surprisingly young age. So these right now are your students. They will be graduating, the oldest ones, in the next few years and coming into the workforce, but you don't have to wait. That is what I'm here to tell you, and you in fact shouldn't. You can start laying the groundwork now for these future young professionals. They are very amenable to early relationship building. They love it when companies come into their schools and say, "Let me do a boot camp on computer programming." Like, let me do a soft skills training on how to have a meeting with someone, how to do an interview. They've got their resumes together. They're interested in this already. And the schools love it too, because they don't have a lot of money to cater to everything that these kids want and think that they need. So go in and be a partner. Start with just one school. You'd be surprised how much headway you can make in a couple of years. Start when they're freshmen and sophomores. Bring them on campus. If you've got a local school that you work with, bring some kids on campus and show them around. Give them training. Let them see what it's like to work in business. Also consider an expanded internship program. Now, when I say expanded internship program, people tend to cringe because they think I mean, oh God, we have to do our internship program over. Internship programs for juniors and seniors in college are fine. You should keep those. But consider bringing on a Gen Z intern. It doesn't have to be official. You can do it one department at a time. The smallest organization can do this. All you need is one manager who's willing to oversee the kid for the summer and teach him a few things. And gradually you start expanding the program over time. The point is, don't say the internships have to be for college students, because these kids are ready, and they're great interns. The final thing I'm going to suggest is board membership. I have a client, DeVry University, that has a Department of Information Sciences. Guess who's a member of that board? The FBI. Because the FBI said, we've got a skill shortage in cybersecurity. We can't hire anyone. So we're going to go make our own people. So they went to DeVry and they helped shape a curriculum around cybersecurity. And sure enough, DeVry is providing a steady stream of cybersecurity experts to go work at the FBI. So if you need a certain type of talent, consider going into the schools and helping them work on ways that these students can be prepared for you when they graduate. What do both cohorts in the millennials and Gen Z have in common? Anyone want to guess? Technology, that's true. Well, let me give you a hint. It has something to do with the number up here on the screen. 75% of millennials and Gen Zers want to start their own business. They do not want to work for an established organization. Now, you might think, well, that's bad news, because we all are established organizations. But I don't think this necessarily is bad news. I think what's important for us to realize is that we have to infuse our organizations with an entrepreneurial spirit. We need to show them that they don't have to go out and start their own business in order to be fulfilled personally and professionally. That they can learn those critical business skills and come up with ideas and be innovative, working for you and learning from somebody else. And in fact, when I train young professionals, this is what I tell them. I tell them the worst idea that you can have is to think that at 21 years old, you're going to go be the next Mark Zuckerberg. Because for every Mark Zuckerberg, there's 2,000 people who have had their first businesses fail. And as we said, these guys don't like failure. So what can you all do? Well, you want to be establishing that entrepreneurial spirit via what we call intrapreneurship, or the practice of entrepreneurial strategies within the context and leveraging the resources of an established business environment. You can do this. Google's got a program you might have heard of called 80-20, where they allow an employee 20% of their time to work on a passion project that also drives forth the business. You can have innovation committees. DreamWorks does a great job with this. DreamWorks makes the movies that are really clever. Well, those movies sometimes come from random people in the organization who submit their idea for a movie up through the innovation committee. There are little things that you can be encouraging your managers to do on a daily basis to innovate in your organization and make it a place where ideas are welcome. And use this in your recruiting functions too, to show them you're not working at a stodgy organization, that you can do anything that you want to do if you come and work for us. Even if it means portraying yourself a little bit more nimbly than you might think you are in real life. That's what they want to see, that they can grow and learn in their careers with you. Here's a quote from my friend Linda Grattan at London Business School. Linda is one of the foremost experts in generation that's actually global. It's a pretty rare study globally. She says, if there's one thing we know for sure about this generation, it's that they like to have their voices heard and to feel empowered. Perhaps the key to understanding them and knowing how to engage them is just to listen to them. So that's the final point I want to leave you with. If you are at all confused about what to do with your millennials, how to develop your leaders, what to do with the entry-level folks, how to deal with these Gen Zers, you can never go wrong by just asking them. Because they are glad to give you their opinion, they want to be a partner with you, and they want to work with you to drive the future of your organization. Thank you.